Hello and welcome back to the Thousand Cranes Kitchen. I'm Dr. Chris Walinski. First, a couple of notes before we get into today's subject, which is going to be fat and the different kinds of fat. You may have noticed on the YouTube channel that you may have noticed on YouTube that I have like no followers. I have no more followers, and I don't have anyone that's viewed my videos. Being the boomer that I am, about a week ago, maybe not even, it was just a couple of days ago, I was fooling around and I deleted the whole channel, so I had to recreate it. So I need your help. I need your help to repopulate that. Second is that you may have noticed that I haven't come out with a video in a couple of weeks. Reason is there's like real world problems. We're in the process of selling our house and relocating, and so I don't want to make the stove behind me messy and greasy for when people come by and look at the house. So those are two things that I just wanted to clarify. Okay, so today I said we're going to talk about some fats, and I want to start off with a little bit of like fourth grade chemistry. And you remember these little models that you had in chemistry class? Maybe you didn't have them, but you had a picture of them. So in these cases, a single one of these things is an atom, and then when you put them together, they become molecules. Right? It's very simple. In this particular set, we're using the red ones to indicate oxygen and the white ones to indicate hydrogen. So in this particular case, we have one oxygen, two hydrogens. What does that equal? H2O, H little 2 and an O, which this is a water molecule, a single water molecule. If you have H2O2, that's actually hydrogen peroxide. And then there's all of these ways that we can mix these different types of atoms together. And then in these, in pretty much any one of these sets, carbon is always indicated by a black little circle. And so in this case, you can see that the oxygen is very happy having two bonds, right? You want one, two. Carbon, on the other hand, has this kind of like a pyramid shape, and it's very happy having four bonds. Now the thing is that if you have a carbon atom and then you have four hydrogens onto it, this is called a saturated molecule. And what that means is that, let's say for instance, the carbon only had three hydrogens on it, it would be unsaturated. What is carbon with four hydrogens on it? This is actually methane. And contrary to popular belief, methane is a colorless and an odorless gas. And now you're thinking, oh, now wait a minute, I've smelled methane, it stinks. It smells like, rotten sulfur, rotten eggs kind of thing. The thing is, because methane is such an highly explosive or combustible gas, they actually add a smell or an odorant to the methane, so that when your stove is on, or you light your stove or your gas grill, you smell that nastiness. If you didn't have that odorant in there, you would have no idea, and so your house could, theoretically build up with methane, and bad things happen. Okay, so now I want to get into something. We're going to go from fourth grade chemistry to organic chemistry, which is like the killer class in college, right? That's one of the two classes that like weeds out all the pre-meds. Like, oh man, I couldn't get through organic chemistry. So here we have, from what I've already told you, you know that these black ones are carbons, and you know that these red ones are oxygen, and you know that these white ones are hydrogen. And what we have here is a long chain fatty acid. And this is actually not as long as they normally are. This is only, 8 carbons. Normally fatty acids are from like 13 to I think 22 carbons long. So it would actually be probably 3 times the length of this. And what we see here is, remember I said that this was purely saturated? This is a saturated fat. And what does that mean? That means that every carbon that could have a hydrogen attached to it does. And so these saturated fats And again, they're normally longer. Notice how straight it is, relatively speaking, right? It's pretty much straight. If we had to pack, let's say we had to pack a little box, a small box with hot dogs, and each one of those hot dogs represented a saturated fat. What we'd find is that they stack in there pretty well, right? You could get them in there to pack so that they didn't move at all. And how that relates to what I'm talking about here with saturated fats is that at room temperature, saturated fats don't move at all. They're actually solid at room temperature. So you think, well, what kind of fats would that include? That includes things like butter. It includes the fat that's on beef. It includes the fat that's on pork, lamb. You know, when you, not to be, but you know, you eat lamb and then you get that kind of that thing on the surface on the roof of your mouth. That's saturated fat. And so for years and years, there's been like battle raging. You know, remember does coffee or does tea have more caffeine? And then is the issue with cholesterol and eggs? It's a yolk. It's a white. You shouldn't eat eggs. You should eat eggs. The same thing's happening and has happened with saturated versus unsaturated fats, and that is most of the time we hear don't eat saturated fat because it's bad for you. And in fact, there are some characteristics of saturated fat that aren't particularly healthy. We have not yet talked about HDL and LDL, but HDL is a protein that is helpful to us because it takes cholesterol from our bloodstream and drops it off at our liver so that it can be excreted. LDL, on the other hand, is a similar protein, except LDL drops cholesterol off in our blood vessels, which form plaques, and then it decreases the lumen, the space inside our blood vessels. But my point is that saturated fats tend to work against the good HDL and work with the LDL. So that is one area that we're concerned with saturated fats. Why are they called saturated fats? Well, when it rains, the ground absorbs the water, right? And the rainwater just gets into the ground. But there comes to a point sometimes where the ground can't absorb any more water, so pretty soon you end up with flooding. And that means that the ground has been saturated with water. Likewise, if you have a cup of tea and you put a sugar cube in there and it's hot tea, you mix it around, all the sugar will melt, right? It'll dissolve into the tea. What happens if you put 12 sugar cubes in there? At some point, you put one after another, it's going to stop being absorbed by the tea, and that's because the tea becomes saturated with the sugar. So when we say there's a saturated fat, it means that all of the carbons that could have a hydrogen do. And what we see here is that's exactly the case. All right, so now we move on to, and let me just kind of paraphrase here, that we're not saying that saturated fats are bad. They include milk and ice cream and some of the good things, but you know, it's not like you shouldn't ever have milk. It's not, well, if we're talking about the prostate patients, you should not have milk, but you know, butter and yogurt and a little bit here and there. Again, if I didn't call this the Thousand Cranes Kitchen, we'd call it everything in moderation. So there we are with that. Now, what we know is that the side with the oxygens, that's the alpha end. And as you might imagine, the side without the oxygens is the omega end. So, through the miracle of video, we now have the exact same thing, except something here is weird, right? It's got two bonds. So in this particular case, we see that instead of each carbon being attached one on each side to another carbon and then needing two more open bonds to the hydrogens, we see here that there's only one hydrogen, and then one bond to another carbon, one bond to the other carbon. There's a double bond. And when we see that, what happens is that both of these are no longer saturated. These are unsaturated. And it's just one double bond, so this is a monounsaturated fat. And this is the alpha end, that's the omega end, 1, 2, 3. This is an omega-3 unsaturated fatty acid. And I'm saying fatty acids, but it's a fat. So what is the claim to fame of this? This, as you can tell, all right, it's not as long as it should be, but if you can imagine that this part here kept going straight, it's only got 8 again. If it went 22 long, it would be this long, it would be really, really long, and then it would have a bend in it. So it would look kind of like a hockey stick or a boomerang. And unlike the example of the saturated fat where we said, let's pack a box with hot dogs, if we had to pack a box with bent hot dogs that were kind of shaped like a hockey stick, they don't line up as well, right? There's going to be some empty spaces, things are going to slide around a little bit, and that's why monounsaturated fats are liquid at room temperature, and that's another reason why they're so much more beneficial to us. So examples of monounsaturated fats, which are the ones that you really should try to include a lot of in your diet, would be olives and avocados. If you listen to this list of like pistachios and almonds and peanuts and pumpkin seeds and all those things, when you think about a Mediterranean diet, so it's not only just the avocado, it's avocado oil, it's not just the olives, it's olive oil. All of that is part of the reason why Mediterranean diets are considered so good for us. And then add into that, the other component is fish. And the fish are where we get our omega-3s, which I'll get to in a moment here. So with monounsaturated fats, it's one double bond. Now, I didn't make a polyunsaturated, but polyunsaturated fats would have 2 or more double bonds. And they're labeled for where the double bond is, so that there's omega-3s, there's omega-6s, there's omega-9s, there's all sorts of. Omega-9s are actually, I think it's confusing, omega-9s are actually a monounsaturated versus omega-3 and omega-6, which are polyunsaturated. So let's talk about omega-3s. Omega-3s are known to lower inflammation, which we haven't had our episode on inflammatory process and inflammatory diseases and how bad inflammation is in our body, but we will get to it. But just remember that omega-3s decrease inflammation. They have neuroprotective elements, meaning that it helps protect our bodies from like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. It can protect us from cardiovascular events like heart disease and that sort of thing. Another thing that's really important with omega-3s is, especially if you have children or grandchildren, for infants, during the time that the brain is forming in the first 3, 4, 5 months, it's crucial that your baby gets omega-3s, because omega-3s are what help to develop a strong brain. It's also been shown to fight fatty liver, and it has also been shown to be beneficial with diabetes and obesity. So omega-3s, the bomb, okay? And the other thing is that omega-3s and omega-6s, we don't make them as humans. And so they're called essential fatty acids or essential nutrients. So we have to get them from eating. Now the thing is with the omega-3s and the omega-6, and so the omega-6, you understand, is if this is the if this is the omega-N, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 would be, this would be the first double bond in those cases. Scientists speculate that back when we were foraging, you wouldn't have the same diet every single day. You wouldn't go and have fast food every single day. You wouldn't have the exact same diet. And some days you'd get your protein from finding some duck eggs maybe, and the next day you'd maybe eat some beans or lentils, or your diet would be varied. The thing is that there are people that espouse that omega-6s are harmful to us, or they're not safe. And the thing is, I really think it comes down to the amount of omega-6s versus whether it's safe or unsafe. Again, everything in moderation. What we try to get to is a ratio of 1-to-1 of omega-6s to omega-3s. However, in our American diets, which our American diet is terrible, most people are getting like 14, 15, 16, 17 times more omega-6s than omega-3s. And whenever you have something that's thrown way out of balance like that, it just can't be good, and that's the case. So, as far as what types of foods, most of it is like vegetable oils, seed oils, so sunflower oil, corn oil, canola oil, which if you can avoid canola oil, please do, because it's so processed. They clean it and they dry it and then they heat it. Anytime you heat an oil, it's prone to oxidation, which we've talked about how bad oxidation is. Then they soak it and they press it and they mix it with solvents, seriously, and then they do other processing and refinement to get to the final product of canola oil. So if you can stick to some of the more natural oils, you'll be better off. Walnuts. Walnuts are really, if you look at what foods have omega-3s, you'll see walnuts. And if you look at what foods have omega-6s, you're going to see walnuts. The thing is that walnuts have, it's 37 grams of omega-6 versus only 2.5 grams of omega-3. So that gets us right back into that ratio. So I'm not saying don't eat walnuts, but walnuts have a pretty bad ratio of omegas in there. So if you're going to try to get your omega-6, your omega-3s, stick with the fatty cold water fish like the salmon and the tuna and the trout, which incidentally, salmon and tuna and trout don't create omega-3s on their own either. They're just like we are. They get it from their food source. So where do they get it? They get it from like algae and plankton. We don't normally eat algae and plankton, but you could buy and eat algae and plankton supplements. In general, we talked about supplements in the past. You'd rather get the food source than take a supplement. Like for instance, there are, should you take an omega-3 supplement or an omega-6 or an omega-9 supplement? And omega-9 is the monounsaturated like olive oil. I will say that omega-3 and omega-6s, well, let's start with omega-9. Omega-9, we get plenty of that, okay, because that's not an essential fatty acid. We can produce that and we can get it in our diets. Omega-6, we're already getting a ton of that, so we really don't need that. And then omega-3s is kind of what we're left with. Should we take an omega-3 supplement? It's just like any of we talked about vitamin E, we talked about vitamin C. It's just so much better if you can take your omega-3 in a food source versus in a pill form. Another thing that's a little bit confusing, I went to the store and I saw peanut butter that has omegas, omega-3, omega-6. I don't think most places advertise omega-6s, but it's got omega-3. The thing is that peanut butter got a lot, like 8 grams of monounsaturated fats, like you find in olive oil, and then compare that to about 4.5, so it's like 2-to-1 polyunsaturated, and out of those polyunsaturated, it's only like 27 milligrams of omega-3 and 6. So peanut butter really isn't a great source of, I don't want to get you all confused here, of omega-3s and 6s, but it's a great source of monounsaturated like the olive oil. So across the board, if you look at, you just pull up a site and see what omega-6s do, it's basically kind of almost the opposite of omega-3s. It'll tell you that it increases inflammation, it increases cardiovascular disease and autoimmune diseases, and something that's really come up a lot recently. When I was a kid, I never heard of irritable bowel. Now everybody's got it. And this has been attributed to omega-6, but what I would caution you and say that I really think it's more the ratio of the 6 versus the 3. So eggs is another thing that, how do you get so many omega-6s in your body? Eggs is one. How many times a day or how many times a week do you eat eggs? Maybe you only eat eggs a couple of times a week. The thing is, how many times do you have mayonnaise? Mayonnaise is made out of eggs. So again, everything in moderation. Don't cut out eggs, don't cut out mayonnaise. There are some very nice foods like pumpkin seeds and sunflower seeds and pine nuts that pistachios, again, very much like the Mediterranean diet, that also have omega-6s in there. So I probably thoroughly confused you, and I apologize for that. I do want to do a separate episode just on omega-3s and 6s because I want to talk a little bit more about the algae and the plankton, the sources, and maybe where you can get those. I thank you for your patience. I thank you for watching. I really appreciate your support, your comments online. Don't forget, if you have a topic that you want me to cover, just send me an email, chris@1kcranes.org. And other than that, until I see you next time, be a blessing. Thank you so much.